Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our virtual NBC6 Voices on our Facebook and YouTube pages. I'm Jawan Strader. Well, living in the pandemic can affect children directly and indirectly. Aside from getting sick, many kids are struggling with their emotional, physical, and mental well-being after being impacted by the pandemic. Children have experienced changes in their routine, breaks in learning due to virtual learning, along with missing out on life events, not being able to celebrate birthdays or even school events. Some kids have also experienced the loss of loved ones due to the virus. So here with me today to discuss what children today may be going through and how to help keep your kids safe is Dr. Chad Sanborn. Dr. Sanborn is a pediatric infectious disease specialist at Kids Medical here in South Florida. And along with Dr. Sanborn, please welcome Dr. Julia Harper. Dr. Harper is an occupational therapist and psychologist, and she is the driving force of Therapedes, a family center here in Davie. Both of you, welcome to the show this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, Dr. Sanborn, let's start with you. We're seeing more children out there with COVID cases now that kids have returned to the classroom. So do you think that that has sparked some kind of fear in children? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so yes and no. I think a lot of people are over it, if you will, in some respects, that they've been bombarded with this in the media and the news, hearing the parents talking about it for a long time now. However, I think some children are fearful of acquiring the virus, spreading the virus to other people, especially if they've been impacted themselves. Obviously, in South Florida, many of us have known people who have done poorly with the viral infection, be it a child or an adult. And a lot of these children are fearful of having that same thing happen to them. So there's a variety of different emotions I'm seeing in the children. The smaller ones, sometimes, less fearful than some of the older ones, but I've seen the whole gamut where teenagers are fearless, young children are scared, and vice versa. So a little bit of everything is what we're seeing at the moment, especially as different stages of this pandemic have affected the children differently.
Very good point. And Dr. Harper, I want to hear from you. What are you seeing in regards to some of the children in dealing with the pandemic, especially those mentally and emotionally and some of the things that they may be going through?
Well, I think the reality is that, children's brain are the same as our brains in the sense that we have the experience of uncertainty, and so do they. What I find is more appealing about children is that they're willing to accept the words, I don't know. As adults, we think we should know, and when we don't, we become anxious. But the reality of it is we don't know. And if we tell children the truth that we don't know, and we let them know that not knowing is okay, then they really handle it a lot better. It's that desire to know and not knowing when the end is. It's like trying to get to Disney World. Are we there yet? We're all kind of ready to be there yet with the pandemic, and we're not there. We thought we would be, and we're not. And so the truth of the matter is we really have to just say to our kids, we don't know. Here is what we actually do know, and give them that information and allow them to have the space to process that in a way that makes sense to them.
And I want to ask you, and I want to ask both of you, Dr. Sanborn, what are some ways to help protect our children during COVID, during this tough time?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say to Dr. Harper, if you find great effective ways to communicate, I don't know, to the adults and the parents, sometimes that would be helpful as well, because that's a challenging thing from our end, trying to handle some of these questions and the information changes. And I don't know is probably the best response we have certain times. And that's not what people want to hear, unfortunately, from the adult side, right? But no, I think important things to remember is that this virus is contagious, it's spreading through the community, and trying to get age-appropriate vaccines to children. So 12 and up should get vaccinated. It does seem to protect these kids from being hospitalized and becoming very ill, fortunately. Second thing, if a child's too young to be vaccinated, trying to keep the people around them in close contact. So grandparents, parents, make sure that they're vaccinated. It's a great way to try to prevent the spread of this virus. And then lastly, which is sometimes difficult to do, especially as things open up more and children are more in contact with each other, trying to keep some degree of social distancing, wearing masks, and, trying for the parents to remember when a child is sick, it may be nothing, but it may be COVID too. So having them tested and not sending children sick to school is an important thing we can do to try to stop the spread in the classroom.
Okay, Dr. Harper, I want to hear from you, especially from a mental health standpoint when it comes to children, because this is something that's often not talked about a lot when it comes to children, when it comes to teens that have been dealing with COVID. Because again, we talked about it earlier at the top of the show. I mean, they're dealing with missed birthdays, missed activities, missed events because of COVID. And many of them having to deal with doing virtual last year. Now they're back in the classroom, but that impact, that long-term impact from what happened last year is still with some of these students.
Yes, and the reality of it is that it'll continue to be with them for a while. And so, you know, having our kids understand that this is just part of the process of life. And that being frustrated about it is absolutely normal. But one of the biggest things that we've had to work on the last year with our clients, especially, is the issue of persistence to do hard things. And this is a hard thing. And our kids need to learn how to persist. We can't just throw up our hands and say, okay, it's not over and I'm done with it. And I'm going to just go do whatever I want to do, which is kind of what is happening in general, not just with our kids, but with our adults. But when you're dealing with our our teenagers, we have to handle them very differently than you would, let's say, your elementary student or your middle school student. So again, the communication with the child is going to be age appropriate. You're going to get more compliance maybe from your younger kids if you're able to just say to them, listen, you can't do this now and mommy's trying to keep you safe. Very different from a teenager who might have some flexibility and some freedom, and now you have to really help them to reason out. And the thing that I find is most helpful is when you say to them, you have a responsibility to others in your life. Teenagers will listen to that. They will listen to the responsibility they have to their grandparents, the responsibility they have to their own parents. They will understand that it is a sacrifice that they have to make, but they want their families around. So I think if we appeal to that sense, and not so much a sense of loss, but a sense of protection. We keep harping on the idea of you've lost this, you've lost the other, you've lost prom, you've lost the party. But what about how much you've gained? You've gained closeness with your family. You've gained the ability to protect the people around you that you love. Let's focus in on what you've gained and what you have control over versus what you've lost.
But Dr. Harper, how do you deal with that as a parent as well when it's the loss of a loved one? Because we talked about as well. I mean, there are some families, they've lost 2, 3 family members, if not more, because of COVID.
You know, it's a tough thing. I remember at the beginning of COVID, relatively beginning, around June last year, I had to talk to a 4-year-old who lost his grandmother. And I worked with his mother and him, and I really had to help him understand what the word dead meant. I mean, it was very difficult, but he didn't even know what the word meant. And so sometimes, you know, having to grapple with these things, it's all about languaging. And how do you give 4-year-old a language for loss and what that means? One of the big challenges we have is that as the adults around the kids, we want to protect them from feeling certain things. We think they shouldn't feel sad. They shouldn't feel lost. They shouldn't feel frustrated. And I come from a completely different school. I think you should feel it. And here's why you should feel it. Because it's part of life. And to live life without feeling it is not to live at all. And so the goal here isn't for our children not to feel these things. It's for them to be able to understand what it means to actually feel it and to rise up and to build resilience to these feelings.
Dr. Sanborn, I want to go back to you and I want to ask you about the physical impact that some of these teens, some of these kids may be experiencing, because let's remember now, as you said, there's not a vaccine for kids that are under the age of 12. So for the kids that have gotten COVID, have you seen more kids get COVID? And then I wanted to ask you, as far as the teens that have gotten COVID, we even had a story on NBC today talking about we have what is called long haulers, those that carry COVID after they test negative, but then they're calling them longers, those teens out there that are still going through this stuff and how it's impacting them emotionally and mentally. Have you seen any of that as a doctor dealing with kids?
Yes, unfortunately we have, so we are seeing a lot more children get infected with this wave, Delta variant, kids being in schools, probably a combination of all these things. So we see a lot more sicker kids in the hospital, certainly, who are acutely ill. And it's scary for a teenager who is, this aura of invincibility around them to be gasping for air in the hospital. It's tough, right? Fortunately, these kids will leave the hospital. But to your point, we are seeing a lot of children who are even less affected, so not quite as sick as coming to the hospital, who have cough that will last for weeks, difficulty sleeping, fatigue, exercise intolerance, kids who used to be very successful and very good athletes, not able to do the things they used to do before, even if only for temporary periods of time. Very frustrating to the families, to the children, and very scary to many of these children as well. Certainly, again, kids have always gotten sick. Kids are generally resilient to a lot of the illnesses they encounter. With this, there's a lot of unknown, which is scaring families and children alike. And we don't have wonderful answers just yet to say, oh, in a week you'll be fine, in 2 weeks you'll be better. So each kid, it's individualized how the recovery is going to be. And, for these children who have these long haul symptoms, memory loss, inability to concentrate, it can be difficult to tease out from the losses they're having in their own life and their change in routine, schedule, living situations, things like that. So there's a lot rolled in over there, but we are seeing more and more children affected, not just with the acute illness where they're getting sick, but weeks down the line, unfortunately.
Do you believe, Dr. Sanborn, that we need to add more focus on teens, on young kids with COVID? Do you think we're not doing enough, or do you think enough is being done, even though we're still learning more and more about the virus?
I think before it used to be a trickle down. Oh, kids are going to be fine. Don't worry about it. And they don't get that sick. We're seeing a very different picture in August and early September here in South Florida. So I think, yes, more of a focus has to be put on children. And I guess for better or for worse, having more kids being affected, both acutely and kind of a longer term problem that they're having, allows us more opportunities to deal with that and to kind of move forward, study, figure out the best ways to help these kids recover, get better. So, to every cloud, there is a silver lining. I guess the only good thing we're seeing from the more infections in children is the more opportunities to be able to see what works, what doesn't work, and how to help these kids get better.
And Dr. Harper, what are your thoughts on that from a mental standpoint, from mental health standpoint, and when it involves children, when it involves teens? Because sometimes mental health will be looked down upon. And I'm trying to make sure that we make sure that mental health is at the forefront, that we acknowledge it, because we know that suicide rates run high, especially when it comes to teenagers. Do you believe more of a focus needs to be put on mental health as it involves COVID and kids and teens?
Well, absolutely. I believe that mental health should be something that's looked at in general, and especially now in this situation where COVID has really added an additional stressor in terms of our mental health. I wanted to add another variable to it, and this is brain health. This is something that's not really being brought up, but the actual health of the brains of our children as a result of actually being on more screens. We've had a situation now with this pandemic putting us on screens for work and for school, hours on end, and the amount of time that we're being put on screens absolutely does affect the brain. And there is a relationship between brain health and mental health, such that when we're getting our neurochemicals being altered from the extended amount of time on screens, we're seeing additional issues that support or facilitate concerns around depression, decreased motivation, lack of attention. I'm very concerned about our kids making that transition back into school right now. We all wanted our children back in school. We're very excited to have them having live classes now. However, we're going to be dealing with a challenge of children having difficulty with actually attending to live information after being on screens for a full year. So we have so many different parts of this that we have to deal with. How is the actual physical health of our kids as it relates to COVID and vaccination? How is their brain health? Are they able to really recuperate and rejuvenate and regenerate those parts of their brain that really have gotten hammered over the last year being on screens? And then, of course, in addition to that, the mental health, the mental piece that comes with the emotional and mental stresses of COVID and all that goes around it. So we have multiple parts of this conversation that needs to be looked at. And so much of the attention is being placed in one area and not all of them. And certainly not enough attention is paid as it relates to our adolescents and young teenagers, our middle schoolers, and I think many, many more conversations need to be had.
And Dr. Harper, I want to ask you this as well, because children's hospitals around the country basically have seen a rise in the number of children who need mental health help, especially for kids of color. Why do you believe that that's the case?
Well, I think the challenge of it is that we are not educated at all around the issues of mental health. We're not prepared. And I always say, think about your mental health as you do your physical health. It is the same challenge we have in the Black community with physical health and being able to have support consistently and not just going to the doctor when you are in an emergency state, right? Being able to have well-visit checkups. We don't really do that in our physical health, far less for our mental health, especially in Black culture. We don't have a culture of esteeming and thinking of mental health as something that is balanced, that we need to pay attention to, that we have to keep a mental health hygiene. So I think that there is a language in our around mental health in general. It's a issue of taboo, still is, unfortunately, and even more so in our communities and minority communities, where the reality of it is resources are limited. And when you have to choose where you put your resources, most times people are going to pay attention to their physical health over their mental health.
Very good point. And Dr. Sanborn, I want to come back to you and I want to ask you your biggest advice for parents when dealing with their kids and teens during this age of COVID.
Sure. So I think all the points brought up are excellent. Certainly, there is an enormous amount of stress that everybody's under at the moment, both parents, teens, small children, and whether they can vocalize it or not, they're all experiencing it. I think it's important to let the teenagers and middle schoolers and elementary school kids know there will be an end to this. The whole world has changed for them, right? This is completely new for them. In many ways, kids are more adaptable than we are. We're a bit set in our ways sometimes, and it can be challenging for us to deal with new experiences. For kids, they're always going through new experiences. So I think they're more adaptable than we give them credit for. I think to foster their ability to understand these things, to work with them, to understand what an infection is, how it affects different people, how what they do is related to what happens in their classroom and their community and their hometowns and their family settings is important. So aside from the important things, vaccines and trying to keep kids who are sick away from each other, which are, in my opinion, somewhat common sense things, it's important to encourage them not to be scared by all they're hearing, and you're surprised what children will hear in conversation between adults, etc. But to let them know that, this is something that, hey, we can get through, something that may have affected their family in a horrible way, but not that every person who gets this is going to have a terrible outcome, certainly. And that at the same time, for some of the teenagers who may feel more invincible, hey, this is serious, guys. You have to be part of a community. You have to realize that, what you do does impact what happens with other people. So I think there's a variety of different facets, different ways, different levels that we can approach this with children in depending on their developmental level and what the family is experiencing.
Very well said. And Dr. Harper, same question for you. Your biggest advice for those parents out there dealing with their kids during this age of COVID?
Well, I think the number one thing we have to do is realize that we can stop this from traumatizing our children. The bottom line is that this is a difficult situation, but it doesn't have to be a trauma. Trauma is defined by having a difficult situation met with the inability to do anything. And as long as parents empower their children to do something, and it doesn't have to be the biggest thing, but the importance of wearing the mask or washing their hands or being able to help them make a decision about something that they can do to help someone or to help themselves. As long as we're able to do something, to take some kind of purposeful action, it moves us out of a situation being uncomfortable, moves us into a situation being uncomfortable rather than traumatic. That's the number one question I get. Will my child be traumatized by the pandemic? No, they won't. They won't have to be. Not unless you stop them and you scare them and you tell them, they have no control. That's when it becomes traumatic. The minute you give them a small act, a purposeful act to do, we're no longer traumatized. We're acting in the direction of taking care of ourselves, of coming back, of resilience, and of coming towards some type of normalcy. Even though we don't know, there are things that we can do.
Very well said. Dr. Harper, Dr. Sanborn, thank you so much for this all important conversation. I really appreciate the both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Okay, right now we're going to switch gears a bit and we're going to talk about water safety. It's still summertime out there here in South Florida, and we here in South Florida have access to the water. So it's very important that we talk about water safety and how to protect your kids, especially during this time when it comes to swimming. Here with me to discuss the importance of water safety is Bridget McKinney. Bridget runs Professional Sharing with the Purpose, a mentorship and swim organization out of Miami. Bridget, welcome to the show this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Especially about a topic like this. This is essentially one of the most important topics that we often not have as often as we should. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Well, I'm glad too, because me, myself, I have a personal story. When I was a little kid, I almost drowned because I didn't know how to swim. I just thought everybody knew how to swim naturally, and I realized real fast that I didn't. And fortunately, someone was able to pull me out of the water at the time. But let's talk a little bit about your initiative and why you're so passionate about teaching others how to swim.
And, I'm glad you shared that personal story. And many others have very similar stories to yours. I'm fortunate not to have had a personal experience, but I've witnessed those incidents that have brought this to the forefront. In other words, in the area of Miami Gardens, about 4 or 5 years ago, there were two drownings, near drowning and a drowning incident on the same day. And my husband and I were watching the television and we stopped and I said, oh my goodness, I realized all the pools around us have been closed and there was not an opportunity for kids to learn to swim. And then cost became a lot of the issues that many families and households said, well, I can't afford it if I wanted to engage or have my child to learn to swim. So when we found a open facility, which was in Opalaka, I reached out to that one family, the survivor. She was a 2-year-old. And I promised that parent, I said I would teach that kid to swim. And not only did we teach her to swim, but we offered it to 400 other kids to learn to swim at no cost. And when we said at no cost, that's when the doors open or the gates open. And families began to engage in having the kids learn to swim. But what I wanted to really, really stress was that we did not want a tragedy to happen again in any household, very much like you experienced and others have experienced. We wanted to prevent those incidents. Now, we're not a drown-proof program, but we certainly provide parents and caregivers, equip them with opportunities to prevent unintentional drownings or near drownings.
Bridget, why is there this stereotype that Black people don't know how to swim? It's been a stereotype that's been around for years. So where does that come from?
So that comes from the fear of, and there's a difference. There's the apprehensive and then there's the aquaphobia. So we don't want to confuse the two. Let's just say the apprehensive. If I am an adult and I never learned to swim, or if I had a traumatic experience such as yours, I may be more reluctant to have my son or daughter learn to swim. That's the reality. So we actually pass on our fears or that apprehensiveness where we don't actually engage. And because we don't sometimes have the access to water, that may be one of those factors that kind of limit the amount of individuals that learn to swim. In fact, there's research out there that says about 79% of the households in the Black or African American households don't learn to swim. That's a high number because remember, we still lead in Florida the number one drowning rate, second to Texas, but we are still number one. Maybe because we're in the peninsula, yes, we can factor that in. But the fact of the matter is we don't learn to swim. And those reasons are like under the umbrella of apprehensiveness, phobia, fear, that's just, I just don't want to learn a new skill. But what we have done is try to make it engaging and fun. So we've added so many elements with water, with the music, with the props or the boats, the life jackets. We really try to engage the kids that they're learning to swim, but they're learning a lifelong skill that can save their lives. So a lot of what we do is not just teaching to swim. We also provide parents with CPR training because what happened in that incident 4 years ago, those individuals, those parents, one parent ran down her block holding three cell phone devices. And that was because of sheer, I don't know what to do. She saw her child lifeless at the bottom of the pool, but did not know what to do to respond. So we have added a component where they learn CPR, they learn skills of becoming water watchers, and they learn how to safeguard children in or around water. Because water is fun. Let's not get it twisted. We love water. It's hot, okay? I love to get in water. You love water, I'm sure. But what happens is often that it is one of those things that could be the most dangerous thing within 3 to 4 seconds that a drowning could occur if you take your eyes off. And adults drown. So we can't factor out that it's just children. It's also adults when they don't learn to swim or they jump out to make a rescue and they don't know how to properly make that rescue and they become a drowning victim themselves. So we have a lot of things that we're working around, and our program is centered around providing and equipping adults and children to safeguard themselves in and around water activities or bodies of water.
Okay, well, Bridget, you answered all my questions because I had a whole ton of questions for you. You answered them all. So now I want to know, how do I get in touch with you?
So my program is accessible through our website. You can go to www.p-swap, which is swap.org, or you can contact us simply by dialing 754-226-8897. We do offer swim lessons to adults. Children, we start as young as 6 months, and we go all the way up to adults. This year, we had about 70 adults who learned to swim. And I'm not saying just got in the water. They actually physically learned how to swim. They were able to swim from one end of the pool to the other by the end of the 6 sessions that they took with our program. We're doing a lot of focus around really equipping them to learn how to float, how to use life jackets. You know, we're all using the yachts now, right? So they're all going out on the yachts and they love the parties and that part. But we got to make sure that when they do, that they actually know how to safeguard themselves using a U.S. Coast Guard approved life jacket. And that's very important because there are a lot of flotation devices out there, but we want to make sure that they have that stamp inside and says U.S. Coast Guard approved jacket when they go out. And who should use it? Weak swimmers, non-swimmers, those small children should all have on life jackets. But don't think that just because you have on a life jacket that you can't drown. Okay, you can drown with a life jacket on. It's not properly used, or there could be other factors that factor around having a life jacket, maybe a head injury or some other incident around it. But we have to continue to say, if you do have on a life jacket, you have actually added a layer of protection to save your life.
Hey, man, thank you so much, Bridget. I mean, I learned so much about your program, and I just want to say thank you for what you and your program is doing for our community, and especially for those young kids and adults that can't swim because they're coming out and they're learning a lot, especially parents with CPR and the training necessary. Bridget, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Juan. And listen, don't forget now, it's never too late to learn to swim. So if you ever decide, reach out to us. We will provide. We are very sensitive when it comes to those matters, and we work through those conflicts to build confidence around water and eventually provide you some type of skill set to safeguard you when you're in around water so you can have fun again.
Hey, man, you heard it from Bridget right there. And you know what? Because of my incident, I learned how to swim. And unfortunately, I was always the tops in my class and usually the only African-American in my swim classes when I was in high school because I was such a good swimmer. So, but that taught me a valuable lesson that I needed to learn. And it's because of programs like yours. So thank you so much, Bridget. We really appreciate you. Thank you for joining Voices.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. And before we go, I had the honor of being recognized over the weekend by People Profile, an organization in South Florida that recognizes people in our community doing extraordinary things. The organization honored Miami-Dade Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, Miami Dolphins Senior Vice President of Communications Jason Jenkins, and several others for their work in the community. People Profile honored me with the Inspirational Award for Voices. which addresses issues from mental health, criminal justice reform, and the disenfranchised. So I want to say a big thank you to the founder, Dr. Alan Cunningham, for this very special honor. That's it for our show tonight. You can rewatch this on our live stream, on our YouTube or Facebook pages. Be sure to follow me on Instagram or Facebook at JawanNBC6. And you can also message us if you have on social media, if you have a story idea. And before we go, remember, education is the key to success. If you believe, you will succeed. We'll see you next time. Have a great week.